This is All Things Ansys, a podcast from the technical support staff at PADT. Episode 123, using simulation in the medical world, and an update on news and events from the world of Ansys. Welcome to October and our 123rd episode of the All Things Ansys podcast. I'm Eric Miller, one of the three owners of PADT and your host for these podcasts. This month, I'm not recording from some remote location. I'm sitting in my office at PADT main location at the ASU Research Park in Tempe, Arizona. I've been traveling a lot, as you'll see in the interview coming up, so it's good to be back in one spot for a while. My last trip was to Denver, and I had kind of three takeaways that I was thinking about when I was in the airport coming home. So this last trip was scheduled around a biotech conference put on by the Colorado Bioscience Association. And we had a booth there and participated in some events and really kind of listened to people and met people and talked to people. And what I saw at that conference is that a lot of the, let's say, someday technology that we've been dreaming about and maybe reading about in the paper, it's happening now. Some gene editing is there. It's being used to treat real diseases out there. They're using a lot of real world artificial intelligence techniques to get better information from noisy data in the diagnostic space. And then that's diagnostic devices. And then when it comes to people diagnosing diseases and illnesses and things like that, using AI to help doctors make those diagnoses as well. Image processing, you name it, it's everywhere. And then we're also seeing some advanced materials come out. Things are just really making a difference. So we're seeing a kind of a big jump forward in what we can do medical technology wise, being driven by materials and software and all sorts of cool stuff. So that was kind of neat to see that these things are coming true. And also while we were there the following day, we went out and visited a couple of our, let's say, quote, new space, unquote, customers, right? So these are people, not the big aerospace companies that we're used to thinking of when we think of space, but these are smaller kind of startups or no longer startups, but kind of medium-sized companies out there doing really cool stuff. And then 2 weeks ago, I was actually also in Colorado up at Fort Collins for an AIAA meeting. And what I saw, what we talked about, the hardware we were able to see was just cool. These companies are doing what I've been reading about in sci-fi my whole life. We're talking about, robots repairing satellites on orbit, manufacturing materials and components on orbit, life support systems that are super efficient. It's really, really cool. Even I had a chance to chat with a guy that is doing some very, very cool work with understanding how the human genome and how plant genomes behave in orbit in space. It's really, really, this is really cool stuff. And this is not planning. This is people, they have launches, they're on orbit, they're testing at the space station, they're planning to go to the moon. This is really, really cool stuff. And then lastly, every event in this last trip and the three trips before that, actually, I saw a very strong trend, and it's that people want to connect in person and on a personal level. Yes, we talked about work, but we also talked about our kids, about sports, about weather. We always got to talk about weather. And at one networking dinner, I spent 45 minutes talking about policy options for encouraging carbon reduction. Nothing to do with the conference at all, but somebody was interested in it. I'm interested in it. We had a great discussion. It was really a good connection, right? It had nothing to do with what either of us do. And not only was it great, but when we got done, then another person that had taken part in the conversation started talking about the bear problem he has at their house in the mountains, which was really fun to hear about. Nobody's been injured. Actually, I have to say, I think some chickens were injured, but we were just people that had met each other that day connecting, and it was really, really nice. They had to push us out the door at the end of that event. And so we just need to, my takeaway from that is we just really need to set aside time to connect, not just to do business, not just to get tasks done, but to really take time to connect. So those are my deep thoughts for the day. Let's move on to our interview here. So speaking of medical, which is a couple of the last conference I've been at, this month's topic is on using simulation for medical devices and medical applications in general. As you will hear in the discussion, the issue with medical is that the material is human, right? So there's lots of quality issues. That's part of it. but even more so from a simulation standpoint, is the materials are sticky, squishy, nonlinear, non-uniform. They just don't behave the way that water and metal behave, which is most of what our simulation stuff is, started modeling. So it's also a very complex system of systems, right? The human body, and you introduce devices into it, and now you got a system within a system, right? And the geometry being organic is very tricky as well. So there's a lot there. So let's listen and learn some more. Oh, and by the way, I recorded this discussion from my car at a Starbucks parking lot in Fort Collins right before the AAA meeting. So apologize for a little bit weird on the sound, but it comes across okay. The Kia rental wasn't so bad.
All right, welcome everybody. I am in the Starbucks parking lot in Fort Collins, Colorado, and joined by two of our wonderful engineers here at PADT to talk about using simulation for medical devices, basically. So, Jim, why don't you go first? Introduce yourself. What do you do at PADT and all that kind of thing?
Okay. Yeah, my name is Jim Peters. I'm Chief Engineer of Simulation at PADT. I've been there for over 23 years. A little while anyway. So, my primary responsibility is simulation services as a contract, but also help out on the tech support and training and mentoring side of the Ansys products sales side.
Great. And Chris, what about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Chris Settanni. I have a background in medical device development. In my university experience, I worked on a device to occlude aneurysms, and got a little bit more experience on the post life cycle side at Cook Medical, but I've been working with PADT mostly in support for about a year, mainly under the Flonex products and as well as the some fluid product side. That sums it up.
Great. Excellent. Very good. Well, the reason why we're having this conversation is, PADT actually does medical device development. Our product development group usually has 2 or 3 projects. We've got about 4 right now actually going on that are medical devices, and we use simulation heavily. And then, a good chunk of our customers that buy Ansys or Flonex from us are doing medical device development, and they use simulation to drive their design as well. And one of the things that's changed, at least not for you, Chris, because your career is not that long, but for Jim and I, is we kind of avoided medical devices because they were usually inherently multi-physics. There were lots of things combined together in one package, and a bit difficult to do. But as the simulation tools have advanced and gotten better, we've really done more and more simulation there. So I think I want to start with you, Jim, and I know you do a lot with LS-DYNA these days. So why don't you share a little bit about how LS-DYNA can do some of these cool medical devices that, like an artificial heart or things like that we haven't even looked at in the past?
Yeah. The difficulty with, medical device development is, external stuff is pretty straightforward, regular physics and so forth. But when you get into the human body and wanting to either look at implanted devices or natural devices, such as the heart and so forth, then, the difficulty has been, how do you characterize what those materials behave like, heart tissues, lungs, muscles, things like that. And that's really where a lot of the development on the material side has been, developed over probably the last 10, 15 years. There's been some really good, material models have been set up for that. And then some of the latest capabilities that have been thrown in to the LS-DYNA suite of products is the ability to not only use some of those complex materials, but start coupling some of the natural physics that occur. So one example is the simulation of a pacemaker on a heart. So there is a implanted device. That device initiates an electronic pulse in the heart tissue. That heart tissue, in response to that pulse, then contracts. That contraction, then, if you have a domain of blood within that encapsulating material, will then contract, and then you can actually simulate the realistic pumping of the blood through the heart valves and so forth. So that's one of the most sophisticated capabilities that has been developed. It's coupling the electromagnetic solver to the fluid solver, along thermal solver, all of that together, and so that's really kind of the benchmark of advancing to a whole nother level of detail with those type of simulations. So.
Yeah, really, really cool. And you brought up a really good point that, I don't have my notes here in the rental car. It's humans that are the problem. Parts are parts. Medical devices are what they are, but it's the fact that they interface with the human body that makes it more critical that there be no problems from a safety standpoint, but also the materials and behavior in the human body.
Yeah.
So Chris, your background before coming to PADT is really applicable to this discussion. When you look at what we can do with simulation, like what's the thing that excites you the most in being able to model things in this world of medical devices?
Yeah, it's really nice to be able to, at least from my background, I'll give a bit more detail. Most of my background deals with cerebral vascular aneurysms. So most of what I've looked at has dealt with blood flow in the brain around like sidewall aneurysms or bifurcating aneurysms. So it's nice to see some actual usable results outside of like animal trials or to augment bench test setup, because you can really essentially tune your inputs and outputs a lot better in like a CFD or coupled simulation.
Mm-hmm. So my bias on the Flonex side of things is I always think of it as a aerospace tool because that's how I've used it. But I know that it does a lot more. Are people starting to use it in medical devices? Are they looking at fluid thermal flow in the device? Are they looking at blood flow? How are people using the Flonex tool in this space?
In terms of Flonex, we've seen a little bit of interaction with sensor development for measuring essentially pressure pulsations along compliant devices. So that's one possible application. That we haven't directly seen that in blood vessels, but that is a potential application for like one-dimensionalizing some boundary conditions for a coupled simulation. Yeah,
it's kind of, I guess we're kind of on the edge there, right? So, and most of our listeners should know what Flonex is, but if not, it's a 1D thermal fluid solver. So you have to basically build a network of it, and there's a lot of applications. And say like we worked years and years ago, we worked on a machine that took the blood out of the body and cleaned it and put it back in, and so we modeled some of that fluid flow in that system using Flonex. It was kind of cool. So Jim, what's I guess what's the biggest challenge that you see when modeling these medical devices? Is it materials, or is it the multiphysics, or yes?
Well, yeah, I mean, categorically, it'd have to be the materials. I mean, making sure that the materials are representative of the actual, as close to reality as possible is challenging because, every you could claim every human body is slightly different, and so you can't just generically characterize maybe one type of material characterization as proper for all applications. And so you always get into the issue of having so much variation that sometimes you feel that it's just too overwhelming to encapsulate some of that. But you can, modern technology is getting us much more individual patient type information that we can characterize, instead of just generically making estimations on statistics. We can actually investigate, MRI information, everything about the topology of a given patient, and be able to simulate their particular condition with so much more resolution than just kind of a black box type of an approach in the past. So
Really good point.
yeah, so it's just a lot of technology is available to get much finer resolution studies and so forth. And so that's exciting in that it's getting more and more resolute and more accurate to specific studies that are attempting to be done. So that's the exciting part, is seeing that technology really being applied, and being applied for really useful purposes. In terms of helping specific people with specific conditions. And I'm sure Chris could probably talk about, the whole issue with aneurysms is it's a very specific topology that may be unique to a certain individual. And
Right.
That's not a generic definition of a condition to try to understand how to treat.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. There's a large heterogeneity in the rheological properties there.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, the brain, it gets really complicated. Have either of you spent any time working with VNV40? I can't remember if you have or not. I don't think so. So I'll talk a little bit about that. We were hoping to get somebody from Ansys as an expert on the call, but they weren't available. So one of the things that's changed in the simulation world is, instead of just driving your design with simulation, if you're doing a medical device, you have to go through verification and validation. And generally that's done with testing. Well, now the FDA has rules on how you can use simulation to do both verification, which is basically stating whether the device verification is that does what you say you're going to do, and validation means that it's safe, right? And you can do that with simulation now. And we're seeing more and more customers go down that road, or at least simulate their tests before they spend the time and the money to build the clinical trial devices and test it. So that's really an important advancement in this area.
Yeah, that's true. And one of the really important parts of that whole, regulation and that and those, developing best practices is that, you've got to have validated analytical approaches that you're using for the results to be, considered valid. And, that may seem like a minor thing that, hey, I just got something to run. But, it really is important that the techniques that are being used to capture some of this very complicated physics is, vetted out and validated that that's an appropriate, approach and method to be able to do that. Because certainly when you get into the weeds of the analyses, there's several areas of challenge that really can be somewhat, you can approach them in a variety of different ways, and it's good to have a very peer-reviewed approach to how to address certain types of problems. So.
it's a really good point. You can't just go into your CAD system FEA modeler and hit run and say, "Look, I verified my device." Yeah, it becomes part of the whole quality process. That's a really, really good point. So you mentioned challenges, and there are quite a bit because of the nature of the human nature as well as the complexity. Chris, when you've done these kind of simulations or you've supported customers doing these kind of simulations, what's advice you would give to somebody that's maybe for the first time going to do some serious simulation in a medical device?
I think some good fundamentals, at least on the Flownex side, is your design process is ultimately, at least in med devices, especially more important than your end deliverable. So, if you've done a grid resolution study, if you have core physics to kind of back up what you're displaying to your team, because ultimately, at least from my experience in the med device field, if you can't explain that to someone in reg affairs or another department, your simulation is probably not going to do you a ton of good for your design history file.
That's a really good point. Yeah, because I think as the technology has progressed, we kind of take for granted we're going to get the right answer, but these are such complex problems. You really got to have that fundamental understanding and be able to justify what you did and what the results are telling you. It's a good point. Or nobody's going to use it. So, Jim, what would be your advice?
Yeah. Related to that, I mean, we've been involved in some, validation of analysis used in support of device development, and going through that process, is, as Chris alluded to, is almost more involved than the analysis itself. I know we spent almost 3x the time validating all the procedures and steps and so forth associated with that. And you may view that as, well, that's just unnecessary and it's just annoying to be able to have to do that. But, you got to look at the big picture. You're dealing with devices that are going to be implanted in humans, and, there's, ultimately life at risk there. So, yeah, it seems from an analysis standpoint to be kind of a tedious and not real enjoyable process to go through, but it's there for a purpose, and that purpose is to have the most confidence you can in a simulation that is a basis for promoting a new device use.
Really good. Yeah, I like that way of thinking about it. And as engineers, we sometimes get a little bit upset about that kind of part of it, but it's I mean, we've dealt with it on the FAA side for aeronautics and aerospace for a long time, right? And there's a reason why both cost $10,000, and same sort of thing. Cool. So I think what do you think is missing right now, if anything, for doing simulation in the medical device space? Are we pretty much where we can do almost everything?
Well, yeah, theoretically, it can be done. I think one of the areas that is probably most important and is difficult to do is long-term fatigue studies, especially like on implantable devices. Because even if you say I'm going to do it empirically, and those can just be not practical to be able to study those kind of cycle limits in a practical amount of time. I mean, they have limits as to, we've got to get the product qualified, we've got to get it in clinicals, and then we've got to get it in use. And some of the areas that often kind of gets maybe cut short would be, what are the long-term effects of the durability of this implanted device? Because, what's often, not looked at in a lot of detail is the fact that, an implantable device, if it's in the bloodstream or everything, it's a cyclic event that the blood is pumping. Yeah, and that cyclic load is accumulating a tremendous number of cycles on that device, and that device may work fine for some period of time, but eventually it may start breaking down, and you want to have a good, accurate feel for when, that needs to maybe be removed for safety reasons. One of those examples is clot catchers, things like that. And fortunately, that's a real issue that I have with my wife, who had one of those implanted after an accident. Right. And this is where some of the regulations, it's really important to have consistency, because when she had that implanted, they said, oh, well, you can have it removed about after 6 months. And then after the 6 months was done, we went in to have it removed, and they go, oh, no, you can't remove it after 6 months. There's too much. Yeah, there's too much risk of rupturing the artery for having it removed. You can't do that. Well, this is not a lifetime device. It's got some very, it's got little arms on it, and they can fatigue. And if they start fatiguing, there's been some horror stories of the kind of damage that can occur from some of those. So long story short, that's one of the really, most important things that I think could really use even more advancement is better, estimations of how long this device can safely be used before it's a high risk of deterioration just from use.
Yeah. You bring up something really critical in your own story, is that when we work on these medical devices, almost everybody has something they can relate to personally, right? It impacts everyone we know and care about. And that's an unfortunate but great example that you gave of that. Chris, what are your thoughts? Like, if you could get the Flonex developers to add some capabilities that would help the biotech or biomedical device space, what would you ask them to add in?
I think a really cool and more so applicable feature that might be nice for Flonex would be to add in possibly like a slug flow to simulate like thrombectomy or ischemia in vascular regions. I think that would be very popular with vacuum thrombectomy devices. But that's probably my main the main thing. I think it would add some value.
That's pretty cool. Yes, I think that would be very, very useful. I think there's probably tons more, and hopefully the listeners will give feedback to the developers as well if there's stuff that's missing. But it's come such a long way. And one thing we haven't really talked about is integrating like the control system into the simulation using a tool like SCADE, Ansys SCADE, or doing some of the risk simulation with Medini. I don't think either of you use Medini very much, do you?
No, not currently.
No. Yeah, so that's something we need to bring onto the podcast at some point, because I'm just getting my head around it, but it's basically allows you to do kind of these risk assessments on things. So another great way to obviously very applicable in the medical device space. So cool. Well, anything you guys want to share before we wrap it up, and before they throw me out of the parking lot?
Sure. Yeah, I think one area of device development that we've been assisting in for probably over 25 years, and you would think that with that period of time that everything would be well defined and worked out. Well, one of the applications that was the simulation process was developed many years ago, but it's still a challenge today, is in the area of stents. Yes. Because the basic process of the stent being compressed and delivered through a device into the region of interest and then inflated into place, there's still a lot of tribal art in the doctor's ability to be able to do those successfully. And again, another example of cases where I've had some friends that had some stents reapplied. They didn't take, and it took 3 times before they got a successful event. And every time you have to go back into surgeries, especially if it's an elderly person, that's a really high risk. So there's some real challenges in that, trying to establish how does this device behave post yield, because it really, especially stainless steel type stents, is that you're compressing it and it's plastic the minute you install it. Yeah. So it's not a matter of, let's keep it below yield and try to get as many cycles as we can. It's how many cycles can we get with material which has already been damaged. And that, still continues to be a challenge to how do you get really accurate information for how that particular device is going to behave, because it's very small, and capturing high resolution information for that is still, even today, a little bit challenging to have high confidence in that. So.
Yeah, we used to be happy to do a segment of a stint, just deploy it. And now we can do a lot more, but it's still, you're right, it's still a significant challenge.
Yeah. Sure.
Chris, anything you want to add before we close up?
No, I think I'm good, but thanks again for having me on here. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
No, it's really good to have you. And this is a very broad topic, but it's lunchtime here, and all the high school students are showing up for their Starbucks. I better give up my spot. So we'll wrap it up. And really appreciate it. And thanks a lot for coming.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Talk to you guys later. Bye.
All right, bye now.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, so really interesting. As you heard, we used to shy away from much of this industry because the tools just weren't there yet. But, it's so multi-physics. The other thing I didn't mention, the preamble, right? So they're pretty much there. We can pretty much do it now. If you have any questions about your particular application, please reach out to info@padtinc.com or give us a call at 480-813-4884. We love to talk about this topic. We adore it. Space, medical, we love these things. Let's see how we can help each other get moving more in this area. And one other note, we had hoped to get one of the lead Ansys people for medical on this call, but he was too busy. Thierry Marchal, and I may be mispronouncing that name. He's Belgian. He's a longtime friend, and with others on the Ansys team, has really pushed to make simulation part of medical device design and modeling of medical conditions and situations. It's what he likes to call in silico methods. So there's in vivo and in vitro, right? In glass, in the body. In silico is in simulation, right? In silicon chips. So kind of cool. He's really leading the charge for this in silico methods. If you do not follow him on LinkedIn, you should. It's Thierry Marchal. It's THIERRYMARCHAL. Everything that is going on in the medical place that's worth mentioning, he will mention on his LinkedIn feed. And he also writes a lot of blog articles and things like that for Ansys. So great guy, really, really leading the charge in this area. So, for commercial today, since we're talking about medical devices, we'll just stay on the topic for this month's commercial. PADT's product development team has a group that is dedicated to medical device product development. All of the drivers that make simulation in this industry a challenge also make designing something that requires these kind of medical needs. It's really something that needs special knowledge and special experience. That's why large multinational corporations, whose names I can't mention because of disclosure agreements, and startups straight from the operating room come to PADT. We work with our medical device customers to define specifications, develop preliminary designs, test, and then create detailed designs that are ready for manufacturing, all within the structure of the customer's quality management system. So we're meeting that 13485 requirement, that ISO 13485 requirement through the whole process. We can help prototype concepts or do a complete product from idea to assisting in that first run manufacturing, do the whole way. We've done dozens of devices that are used around the country to help make surgeries more efficient, make knee replacement more robust, and even make wrinkles go away. We've actually done multiple devices that help make wrinkles go away longer and with less pain. So there's almost no part of the body we have not dealt with over the years, even the icky parts we've done. So if you are in the medical device space and you need experts who can effortlessly integrate simulation and 3D printing into the design process, please reach out to PADT at info@padtinc.com or 480-813-4884, and our team would love to talk to see how we can help. So that being said and done, let's move on to the Ansys stock. So it's Monday, October 9th. The markets, when I wrote this, the markets were about to close. So right now, Ansys is at an even $300 a share, which is up from it cut down to $290 last week. So it's a little bit better. I have no idea why it's up or down. It's not at 351, which we saw in July. And that's just the way it is. I think in general, the market is down, and I think that's part of it, but I don't know. But the good news is year to date, that's still up 24.6%. We'll call it 25%, whereas the S&P 500 is up 12.8%, so 13%. So, almost double what the S&P 500 has done. And then if we look over the last 12 months, which is a little bit better way to look at things, we're up 38% for Ansys and only 19% for the S&P 500. So still not as high as, of course, we'd all like to see it, but it's outperforming the market, which is great to see. So still a very strong company and still growing and doing well. So in the news world for Ansys, some great news that Ansys continues to win awards for the best place to work. And if you ever met somebody that worked there, you'll understand why. It really does value and take care of their employees and tries to make what's really a hard job fun and rewarding. So they won again for U.S. News and World Reports for Best Companies to Work For in Technology category. And then they won 2 European rankings. They ranked 25th in the multinational category on Great Places to Work list of best workplaces in Europe. And then because of Brexit, we got a separate one for the UK. And they ranked 24th in Newsweek's Top 100 UK's Most Loved Workplaces. So, you don't win these things automatically. They actually talk to the employees, so you can't really fake it. So really good news, and congratulations to everybody that works really hard on the HR side, and employees that work really hard, as well as senior management that have made a commitment to making Ansys a great place to work. Another cool little bit of news is that they announced that Ansys is participating in something called F1 in Schools, which is a project STEM program where kids design Formula One cars. And now they can do that design using Ansys CFD. So they get an exposure quite young to doing fluid mechanics, and which is, of course, as we know, in any racing, and especially Formula One, is a really important part of making those Formula One cars really excel. So pretty cool there. PADT news? None. We got nothing really to report. If you do work with us in the world of Stratasys, if you get your Stratasys material from us, good news. I will we've kind of pre-announced it. We'll be opening up a new online store. So we were the first to have an online store for buying material for Stratasys, and then we didn't change it. So other people leapfrogged us. So we got a new store coming out really soon. So that's good news for us and our customers who buy material from us. Doesn't really impact those of you who are Ansys users around the world. Unless you buy Stratasys material from us. Let's take a look at the Ansys blog. Picked 3 articles that I thought were worth looking at, that I thought were interesting, I'm going to recommend. So the first one is called Calculate the Simulation Speed Up and ROI of a New Workstation. And thank you, whoever wrote that in Ansys. It's one of the biggest questions we get from customers is, I want to get a new workstation and my boss wants to know what's the ROI. How much faster is Ansys going to run? how many more jobs can I do? How much bigger models can I do? How more complex? Well, this article kind of steps you through that whole process. So we'll definitely be referring that to people in the future. The next one I really liked, it kind of fits into how I'm seeing AI and artificial intelligence and machine learning really getting into more and more places, is designing safer systems with AI, ML, and simulation. So we've talked about it here on the podcast. I've written about it in the Phoenix Business Journal and some other publications. It's really important to realize that you can train your artificial intelligence and machine learning systems using simulation. And that's what the automotive companies do. That's what the people making unmanned vehicles are doing, autonomous in general. So you can also use it to design safer systems, right? So do check that out if you're at all interested in that area or working in that area. And then the last one I thought was really cool is called Small But Mighty. And it's called it's actually called Small But Mighty: Unlocking Narrow Vein Deposits to Fill the Metal Supply Gap. So this is one of my kind of obsessions, is that before we get to a hydrogen economy, which is the end goal, we're going to have to do better at finding metals that we need, especially rare earth metals. And this Canadian company is basically using Ansys tools to be able to find these small veins of deposits to help solve the shortage of critical metals and strategic metals. So check that out as well. Kind of a neat usage of Ansys. This is also another good example of the Ansys startup program. In our blog, we've got a really useful article from popular demand and kind of a continuation of an earlier article that's really popular. This is called Calculating Reaction Forces in a Spectrum Analysis in Ansys Mechanical. So when you do a spectrum analysis in Ansys Mechanical, you have to do some little bit of work to get those reaction forces correctly, because this is a modal combination method, right? So anyway, Alex Grishin wrote that and does a much better job of explaining it. I may have just botched it. So do check that out if you're ever doing spectrum analyses. Then also, we've got the first of a couple of tutorials from one of our engineers here who's been learning LS-DYNA, and it's called Introduction to Ansys LS-DYNA Tutorial 1, Ball Impacting a Plate. So it's a really straightforward beginning, kind of get your feet wet with LS-DYNA, which we're huge, huge fans of here, and check that out. It's really good. And I'm actually, when I get done recording this podcast, I'm going to put the second one up, so it'll be there as well. So then on the 3D printing side, we've got a very useful article about flame retardant polymer materials and additive manufacturing. So one of the issues with 3D printing in the past has been, unless you're using metals, the materials that are printed are often very flammable. Well, they now have materials that have additives that keep them from catching on fire. So you can use them in those situations where you might have gone with an injection molded material that was flame retardant in the past. So check that out. And then last but not least, I'm going to do 4 because this one is useful. It's something that we get a lot of questions around. It's called Adjusting Time Steps in Flownex. So if you're using Flownex, it's inherently a transient tool, but the time step size is something that you often want to play with to get the model to run faster or be more accurate. So this is really about how to adjust those time steps. So check that out if you are a Flownex user or interested in using Flownex as a 1D thermal fluid solver. All right, up next is webinars. So we've got 2 in October. We actually just finished one today. So we've got 2 more in October. The first one is going to be Fluid GPU Solver Updates for Ansys 2023 R2. So if you're running Fluid and you're using GPUs, you definitely want to check this one out. And you can watch it live or you can listen to it afterwards. And then our 3D printing team has a really interesting presentation on additive's role in Factory 4.0. So if you know what Factory 4.0 is or Industry 4.0, you'll know why this is really important and to understand where additive fits into that. And that's on the 26th. As always, you can go to brighttalk.com and search for PADT to see these webinars, upcoming webinars, and all of our past webinars. So they're all there for you to watch at your leisure. You don't have to watch these things live, although it's always better if you want to ask questions. So other PADT events, we're kind of winding down for the year. We're going to be headed down to Tucson on October 18th for the 2023 Southern Arizona Tech Expo, Tech and Business Expo. And that starts at noon and goes till later in the evening. Always fun, always good to see our customers in Tucson. We have quite a few, and to meet some new ones, hopefully. So hope to see you there if you're located in Tucson. And then the big event of the year for PADT is our annual Nerdtoberfest. That's coming up on October 25th this year, and it's from 4 to 7 here at our Tempe headquarters. So if you are at all anywhere near Phoenix, Arizona on October 25th, please go to padtinc.com/Nerdtoberfest, Nerdtoberfest, just like it sounds. And it's all of our homepage as well. So you can just click on it and sign up and register. So we have enough Wurst for everybody, beer and Wurst for everybody. It's an open house. We show off what we do, tours of our lab. You get to see our 3D printing stuff. We've got some simulation demos. We got some fun games to play. And then we've got some really cool food that is kind of sort of. German friends make fun of it because it's not, but it's sort of German themed. And it's just a lot of fun. We usually get around 200 to 300 people to show up for that. So hopefully, if you're nearby, you can make it. And then the final big event for the year that we hope to see also people in Arizona come out to is the 2023 Governor Celebration of Innovation Awards. I'm stepping down after 4 years. They're replacing me, which is in a timely manner. I wasn't ejected. I don't want to make it sound like I was fired, as chairman of the board of the Arizona Technology Council. So I won't be hosting this one, which is a shame, but I will be there in the back having fun. So do come if you can. It is the premier Arizona tech event. The governor is going to be there, and the mayor as well, we hope, of Phoenix. And it's put on by the Arizona Commerce Authority and the Arizona Technology Council. So we hope to see you there. So that's all of our events. That's our podcast for this month. I want to thank everybody. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter, which comes out once a month. It's www.padtinc.com/opt-in, where you can see everything that's going on at PADT. Please do subscribe to this podcast where you get your podcasts and spread the word. And as always, do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you for joining us for the All Things Ansys podcast, episode 123. As a reminder, this podcast is not affiliated in any way with Ansys Inc., and the opinions expressed are those of the people on the show only and not of their current or former employers. For more information, visit www.padtinc.com/blog, and please share your thoughts and questions through an email to podcast@padtinc.com. See you next time.